Shadowpan Windwalker Monk is one of the most exhausting classes in World of Warcraft, but why is it constantly considered as S tier in both PvP and PvE? And is there actually a way to enjoy both PvP and PvE on Windwalker without feeling like you have to rebuild your entire character every time you switch content? Even after the skill pruning in Midnight, the spec still asks a lot from you. The core of Windwalker's gameplay is mastery, combo strikes. You get rewarded for not pressing the same ability twice in a row, so you cannot just mash your strongest button over and over. You have to keep rotating through different abilities to keep your damage high, and that is exactly what makes Windwalker exciting. But it is also what makes it tiring. There are still many buttons to manage. There are still a lot of small decisions to make. There is very little room to just relax. It is definitely not the most beginner friendly melee class. Then there is the mobility, and this is where Windwalker really starts to feel special. Between roll, flying serpent kick, and talents like lighter than air, Windwalker is arguably one of the most mobile melee specs in the game. You're always moving, always repositioning, always looking for ways to outplay people with mechanics instead of brute force. Now let's talk about stats, because this is where things get interesting. In PvE, whether you're doing Mythic Plus or raiding, your number one stat is agility. That part is simple. Agility is your primary stat, and it directly increases the base damage of everything you do. So in most cases, higher item level gear is better because it gives you more agility. But once you look at secondary stats, Haste becomes the king of PvE. If we look at the current meta in Midnight Season 1, Haste has clearly risen to become top secondary stat for Windwalker monks in PvE, and that is pretty big shift. For a long time, Haste was mostly seen as a utility stat, something that helped with resource flow, something that made the spec feel smoother, but now, it is much more than that. Haste is not just helping you play better, it is directly increasing your damage, and biggest reason for that is how it interacts with Fist of Fury. This is where talents like Momentum Boost and Cyclone's Drift completely change the equation. Momentum Boost creates a very direct connection between your speed and your damage. The more haste you have, the harder your Fist of Fury hits. Since Fist of Fury is one of the biggest sources of your total damage, that means every point of haste starts acting like a real damage stat, not just a comfort stat. Then Cyclone's Drift pushes that even further. You're getting 10% more haste from all sources. That means your gear becomes more valuable, your gems become more valuable, and outside buff become more valuable too. Things like Bloodlust, Power Infusion, or even haste proc trinkets all scale better because of that bonus. So compared to a lot of other specs, Windwalker gets unusually high value out of stacking haste. But the story does not stop there. Haste is key part of Windwalker's cooldown engine because it reduces the cooldown of both Fist of Fury and Rising Sun Kick. A lot of specs cooldown flow also comes from talent-based cooldown reduction, especially through interactions tied to Rising Sun Kick and Blackout Kick. One of the biggest examples is the way Rising Sun Kick can reduce the cooldown of Fist of Fury when it crits. That creates a powerful loop. More haste means you can cast Rising Sun Kick more often. More Rising Sun Kicks mean more chances to crit, and more crits mean more cooldown reduction for Fist of Fury. Since haste is already lowering the base cooldown of Fist of Fury, you end up casting your strongest ability far more often. And if you're playing the Shadowpan hero tree, haste becomes even more important. That is because of Flurry Strikes. Flurry Strikes builds charges through your auto attacks, and then unloads them during Fist of Fury. So faster you attack, the faster you generate those charges. And with talents like Martial Agility, that attack speed ramps even harder, especially during Zenith. So in practice, more haste means faster auto attacks. Faster auto attacks mean faster flurry regeneration, and faster flurry regeneration means your Fist of Fury hits even harder. And on top of that, haste still does what people originally liked it for. It keeps the rotation smooth, gives you more energy, reduces awkward empty moments, and helps you keep generating enough chi to stay on cycle. So in Midnight Season 1, haste is no longer just a stat that makes Windwalker feel faster. It is a foundational damage stat that drives your cooldown loop, empowers your hero talent mechanics, and keeps the entire spec flowing. But PvP changes the equation. In Arena or Battleground, the game is not about sustained damage over several minutes. It is about short kill windows. Sometimes 5 seconds is all you get. That is why mastery becomes much more important in PvP. What really matters in Midnight PvP is how Windwalker turns a short setup into a lethal burst window. The goal is simple: land your crowd control, activate Zenith, and compress as much damage as possible into just a few seconds. Zenith is a huge part of that burst setup. It immediately resets Rising Sun Kick, gives you 2 chi, and reduces the cost of your chi spenders. That means you can chain your hardest hitting abilities without slowing down to rebuild resources. And that is exactly what makes your stun windup so dangerous. In practice, Strike of the Windlord is usually preferred as your main burst tool. The reason is consistency. It sits on a fixed cooldown, which makes it much easier to align with your setup. Whirling Dragon Punch can still hit hard, but it depends on other cooldown conditions first, and that makes it less reliable when every second matters. Zenith also adds immediate pressure through Zenith's Dump, which gives your burst sequence extra front-loaded damage the moment you commit. Another major piece of the Midnight Burst profile is Tiger Eye Brew. This talent builds value during combat and converts that into a strong critical strike boost when you activate Zenith. That means your burst sequence is not just stronger because of mastery, it is much more likely to crit at the exact moment you're trying to secure a kill. So when you put it all together, the PvP stat priority becomes much clearer. Versatility comes first for baseline damage and survivability. After that, mastery is your main offensive stat because it gives you the most direct burst value. Crit and haste matter much less because Tiger Eye Brew and Zenith already provide a lot of you need during your actual kill window. So traditionally, people say this: PvE is for haste, PvP is for mastery. But I think the more interesting answer is somewhere in the middle. That is why I ended up choosing a Haste Mastery hybrid setup. If you're the kind of player who likes jumping between Mystic Plus and Arena, going all in on just one stat can feel limiting. A hybrid approach gives you something much more practical. If PvE wants haste and PvP wants mastery, why not just pick one and stick to it? The answer lies in how specific talents in Midnight allows us to cheat the system. The second weapon here is Cyclone's Drift. By granting you 10% more haste from all sources, it acts like a force multiplier. It means you can hit your PvE resource breakpoints with far less stat investment on your gear. This effectively unlocks a massive chunk of your stat budget. Then you can then dump straight into mastery. And that mastery isn't just a luxury, it's what makes your Glory of the Dawn and Zenith windows lethal. In this setup, your haste keeps the engine running and ensures your Rising Sun Kick is constantly shaving time off your Fist of Fury, while mastery ensures that when those abilities land, they actually hurt. But what about critical strike, you might ask? Well, this is where the hybrid build gets really efficient, with Tiger Eye Brew giving us a massive crit boost during Zenith, and Zuen's Battle Gear adding a flat 20% crit chance to Rising Sun Kick. The game is essentially giving us free crits. Because we're getting those crits for free through our talents, we can safely ignore crits on our gear. This allows us to focus entirely on that haste mastery split. Even your choice of hero talent supports this balance. If you're running Shadow Pan, your haste drives your flurry strikes. Ultimately, the hybrid setup isn't about being average at both. It's about using talent synergies to ensure you have enough haste to keep up the spec feeling fluid in a raid without sacrificing a raw, explosive power you need to secure a kill in the PvP. It's the best of both worlds build. You get the smooth rotation, you get the cooldown reduction, but you still keep that terrifying burst potential. Let's talk about off-meta talents. Where did Jadefire Stump go? In the current meta, it's essentially been benched. So why isn't it making the cut in your average Mythic or Delve? It all comes down to opportunity cost. In Midnight, we have this massive synergy called the RSK package. We are talking about talents like Sky Firehail for splash damage and Shadow Boxing Treads for those multi-target blackout kicks. To get their raw power, you have to give something up, and usually, Jadefire Stump is the first thing on the chopping block. It simply doesn't provide the value you need compared to the raw power of our base kicks. 99 of content Mystic, Delves, and most raid situations, you're better off dropping the stump. Focus on your kicks and let them do the talking. Now let's talk about rotation. Because Windwalker is not really a class with a fixed 1, 2, 3 sequence. It is a priority system. You are always trying to press the highest value ability available while also respecting mastery combo strikes. That means one golden rule always applies. Do not press the same ability twice in a row. For a standard single target opener, the flow looks something like this. Start with Tiger Palm to generate some initial chi, then cast Zenith together with your potion, racials, and trinkets. After that, go straight into Fist of Fury. That is where so much of your burst comes from, and it is your number one priority during that window. Then follow with Rising Sun Kick, and if Rising Sun Kick resets, go right back into Fist of Fury. And if it does not, finish the sequence with Whirling Dragon Punch or Strike of the Windward. And once you're inside the Zenith window, especially if you're talented into Obsidian Spiral, the rotation shifts a bit. Blackout Kick starts generating chi instead of spending it. That means you want to reduce your Tiger Palm usage and let Blackout Kick help fuel your rotation instead. That lets you keep pressing your highest impact abilities more often, and it makes your whole burst cycle feel even faster. That is really the essence of the Shadow Pan Windwalker. It's fast, it's fluid, and when all the flurry strikes start flying, it becomes one of the most satisfying specs in the game. Now in PvP, Windwalker has a very clear identity. The body is a bit fragile, but the burst is extremely strong. That makes the spec especially effective in small scale fights. In Arena, that's obvious, but even in Battlegrounds, I think Windwalker performs best when you stop thinking like a frontline brawler and start thinking like a fight selector. Find their smaller skirmishes, win those smaller fights, then use their local advantage to influence the map. In other words, take control of off-nodes fights and create momentum from there. And finally, let's talk about delves, because Windwalker is actually fantastic there. If you're a solo player pushing higher tier delves, Windwalker is one of the best specs you can bring. The reason is simple: delves are full of small, dangerous enemy packs, and Windwalker excels at short burst windows. Between Zenith Stump, Fists of Fury, and fast flurry of follow-up strikes, you can delete the pack of enemies before they really have time to threaten you. And because delves are basically a series of short engagements instead of a long sustained fight, your cooldown based damage profile fits perfectly. On top of that, the solo utility is excellent. You have the leg sweep for AoE stuns, paralysis to remove a dangerous target, ring of peace for control and space, touch of karma, and fortifying brew for defense. You also have real self-sustain, which matters a lot in solo content. Expel Harm and Vivify gives you ways to stabilize yourself when a pool gets messy, and that alone makes Windwalker much more forgiving than other some DPS specs. What makes this even better is that your delve setup is very close to your Mythic Plus setup. You're still stacking agility and haste. You're still building around smooth rotational flow and strong cooldown access. So unlike some specs that need constant reworking between content types, Windwalker can actually maintain a fairly natural hybrid identity here. And I think that brings us back to the main question. Is there a way to enjoy both PvP and PvE on Windwalker without constantly feeling compromised? I think the answer is yes. If you build around a smart haste mastery balance, it becomes one of the most rewarding hybrid specs in the game. It gives you speed, you burst, it gives you mobility, and maybe most importantly, it gives you a playstyle that always feels active. So yes, Windwalker may be one of the most exhausting classes in WoW, but if you can handle the pace, it might also be one of the most fun. So who is Windwalker Monk actually for? First, it is for players who enjoy high input and high agency. If you like specs that reward quick decisions, constant adjustment, and clean execution, Windwalker can feel amazing. It is also a great fit for players who love speed, not just movement speed, but overall tempo. Everything about the spec feels fast repositioning, fast burst windows, and fast decision making. And if class fantasy matters to you, Windwalker still delivers. Especially with hero talents, the spec has a very distinct feel. It is flashy, aggressive, and it feels like you are constantly building toward explosive moments. Who should probably skip it? If you want a spec that feels stable and forgiving, this probably is not it. Windwalker asks a lot from you, and it does not hide your mistakes very well. It is also a poor fit if you prefer fixed rotations or low maintenance gameplay. This is a spec that wants your attention all the time, and if your main priority is bringing unique group utility, Windwalker is not always the easiest sell. A lot of Monk toolkit is shared across specs, so your value often comes down to how well you can convert the spec's damage profile into actual result. That is the real answer. Windwalker is for players who enjoy pressure, tempo, and constant engagement. It is not for players who want comfort, simplicity, or autopilot gameplay. And that is exactly why the spec feels so good to the right player and so exhausting to everyone else. And that's all, and don't forget to check the comments.